I'm going to go ahead and launch right into Zen Studio. Actually, let me go ahead and just show you the application really quickly. It's kind of your standard Web 2.0-ish application. You have different projects that you can select. You can go ahead and go through different issues, things like that. If I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, Karen doesn't have anything to do right now, so I'll go ahead and set this to open status, and I'll say, Karen, please look at this. And I'll update, go ahead and drag this over to Karen, and now she's assigned that task, things like that. So it's a standard application, and what I want to illustrate is that given just an already existing application, how you can go ahead and start publishing web services. Because something like this might be in the market, and you might get customer feedback. It'd be great if we'd be able to actually tie in web services into this, start getting out the data. And by doing so, you expand the reach, you expand the usefulness of your application out in the enterprise, or the consumer market, or whoever you're trying to serve. So I promised you guys a 4-line web service, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to create a new service called service.php. The first thing I want to do is actually pull in what I call the prepend file. The prepend file basically includes all the issue tracking stuff, all the libraries, as well as the Qcoder framework itself, and it just pulls it right in. The next thing I want to do is actually create my service. So I'll say class my service extends a QSOAP service. Bracket open, bracket close, and then let's go ahead and run the service. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 lines. I save it. We now have a web service. We're done. Okay, you guys probably want a little more than this, right? So, okay. If I go ahead and actually run this in a browser, you're going to see it generates 2 links. I can go ahead and click into it. Let me go ahead and make this a little bigger so you guys can read it. As you can see, it generates a WSDL file. There's really nothing in this WSDL file because we haven't actually defined any functionality yet. But as you can see, this is just a basic standard WSDL file. Let's go ahead and generate some functionality. So the first thing I want to do, the prototypical web service example out there, and I'm going to go ahead and do it now, is add 2 numbers. So let's go ahead and just create a simple function, public function add 2 numbers, which takes in 2 numbers. And then it'll go ahead and just return the sum of those numbers. Pretty simple, it's not rocket science. Now, as I said before, PHP says that number 1 and number 2 and the return value are just variables. SOAP and WSDL needs to know what those types of variables are. So we'll go ahead and create some PHP doc comments, and we'll say, okay, number 1 is an integer. Number 2 is also an integer. And the return value, again, also an integer. Nice and simple example. If I go back and refresh the WSDL file, you can now see that add 2 numbers gets generated in there. It automatically says that here's an integer, and the result also is an integer down here. So we have a WSDL file. Now, let's go ahead and test to see if the thing actually works, right? I could go ahead and just, within this application, build a web service SOAP client and go ahead and access it. But in the real world, you're really never accessing a SOAP service on the same box as a SOAP client. It just, SOAP is meant to be carried over either internet, a LAN, or the internet of some kind. So I'll go ahead and actually switch to another computer and use that computer to access this computer over a network. Now, I only have one computer here, unfortunately. Fortunately, I have Parallels running, and Parallels is running Windows right now. So in a sense, I do have 2 virtual computers, a virtual computer and a host computer running in a virtual network. To make things even more fun, let's go ahead and actually make this client not even a web application. Let's actually make it a Windows application. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio, and I'm going to create in C# a Windows GUI application. It's a traditional standalone Windows application. And use SOAP to talk to my PHP application on my Mac and get data back and forth. So far, so good? Is everyone with me? Cool. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and run this program. This is kind of just in the spirit of Martha Stewart and Julia Childs. There's nothing here. I just basically set up a shell application with the GUI just to speed things along. As you can see, there's no data here. There's no functionality whatsoever. But let's go ahead and start making some functionality. The first thing I want to do when I have a separate project is I want to go ahead and include the instance or a reference to that service so that Visual Studio can now start understanding what I'm trying to access. So I'm going to go ahead and add a web reference. I'll say it's a qcodedemo/service.php. I think that's right. Yeah. And as you can see, it found the service. I apologize for people in back because it's a little small. But I'll go ahead and call this service my service.
So you don't
Actually, I'll call this issue tracker.
You don't even have to directly reference the list.
Well, Visual Studio is actually doing that for you. So it's kind of the magic of fun in Visual Studio. But if you're doing stuff in J2EE, it's the same magic. You specify the workflow file, and it'll find it for you, and it'll go ahead and start running. So now that I have imported that reference, I'll have all the namespaces, all the classes, all the methods are now actually in Visual Studio that I can access for this web service. For example, if I say using issue tracker SOAP demo, the issue tracker web service that I just created is the reference to that is now here. So I'll use the namespace. I'll go ahead and actually create a local instance of the web service in my application so that any part of my application can start using that. So the standard way of doing things, I got to declare that first. So I'll say private issue tracker, and notice how I called it my service, and my service now shows up in the IntelliSense for Visual Studio. And I'll just call it opt service. And then in my form constructor, I'm going to say opt service equals a new, nice and simple. The next thing, just to show off the add two numbers functionality, if I click on that load button, what I want it to do is actually just add two numbers and show the output. So the first thing I want to do is say int result equals my opt service, and if I complete opt service, you'll notice that add two numbers now shows up as one of the functions I can select. And not only that, it specifies right now that it takes in two integers, number 1 and number 2, and it returns an integer, which is exactly what we defined in our PHP doc. So far everything's looking like it's working okay. I'll go ahead and just add up 15 and 25. And then I'll say message box, show the result, so show result. And I need to convert it into a string because .NET is a strongly typed language. Show takes in a string. I have an integer right now. If you guys are familiar with Java C or .NET, this should be familiar with you guys. Let me go ahead and run it. I click on load, and you guys hopefully can see that, but it says 40. Just trust me, it does. You can't see it. And just to show you that I'm not like hard coding anything, why doesn't someone throw out a number? Anyone?
42.
42, great. 42. 42 plus 25 should be what? 67, right? There it is, 67. Shows up right there. To add a little more fun, let's assume that instead of actually never returning an integer, let's have it return a string. Let's have it return a sentence saying something like, the sum of number 1 and number 2 is, and then concatenate the actual sum itself. If I do this, I have to change the PHP doc to say that, no, it's now a string, right? Because I'm actually returning a string. So let me save it, go back to Visual Studio. I'm going to update the web reference. So now I have the updated whistle file. And if I try running this, I'm going to get an error. And the reason why is because it now says that the result is now a string. It's not an integer. So it's having trouble converting that. So let me just change that to a string, save, rerun. And if I hit the button, you can now see it says the sum of 42 and 25 is 67. So far, so good? Cool. So it's all fun to talk about integers and strings and stuff like that, but really the reason why you're exposing web services is because you want other people to get access to the data in your application so that they can start building other things with it. So what I want to do with this application is if they click on load, I actually want the projects drop-down to be aggregated with a list of projects from your system or from the issue tracking system. So let me first go ahead and write that web service. Public function, let's just call it get projects. As I said before, get projects, what we wanted to do is just do basically a select star from the project table and return all the projects as an array. Fortunately, because of the code-generated object relational mapper, we have that functionality already code-generated for us, so I'm just going to go ahead and use that. Again, if you want more information about this, definitely just check out the QCode website. You'll see that load all is just a standard function that gets generated. And we just want to return project load all because it actually gives me, as you can see in the PHP doc documentation, load all returns an array of project objects. It returns an array of project objects, which is exactly what we want to return in the web service. So load all. We'll go ahead and do the PHP doc documentation, and the return value is going to be project bracket bracket. I'll save this. Let me go ahead and go back to the web browser, and let me refresh the WSDL file. What you're going to see now is get projects, and on top of that, in addition to that, you can now see that there's XML talking about the definition of what a project is. What it's doing is, okay, we have a project in our application which has all this really deep-rooted functionality. We can get at things, get at relationships, stuff like that. When we actually submit that and publish it, we just want what's known as a project proxy, or a class proxy, that we publish to anyone else which contains the data. This is that proxy of just the ID and the name, observability, columns, and that one. And that's what we want to publish and send out to anyone who wants to use this web service. So that's exactly what Visual Studio will recognize when we say update web browser. Now if I go ahead and say load, I'm going to go ahead and erase the old load function, the old button handler. And what I want to do is get that array of projects, right? So if I say issue tracker, notice how project is now a class in Visual Studio. Pretty cool. Project is an array of projects, so we'll say project array. We declared it. Now what we want to do is define what it is. If we look at the service, we'll notice that there is now a get projects method. And that get projects method conveniently returns an array of project objects. So we'll go and say get projects. And then this last part, we're going to go ahead and fill in the list box. And we're going to do a for each on the for each project, our project, in the project array. We're going to just take the list of projects, and then we're going to say items, add, and this is C# stuff, so no worries if you don't totally get this, but hopefully you guys get the idea of what we're trying to do here. For the name of the list box item, we're going to say our project, and then notice how the fields that we have available to us are ID, name, which is the same exact thing that we proxied out from our web service. So the name that we want to display in the list box is the name of the project. And for the object itself that we want to store for that list box object item is just the project itself. So I'll save that. I'm going to go ahead and run this application. I hit load, and as you can see, these projects are now starting to show up. And these project names conveniently matches the project names listed in this dropdown here. Cool. So the next thing I want to do is if I select a project, what I want it to do is actually fill out a team member's list box. So I go back to my web service that I'm writing, public function get team members. The input parameter for this would be the project that I want to get the team members for, right? So I just go and say project.project. And note that similar to how when we exported or published a project and created a proxy and sent it out, the input works the exact same way as well. If we ask for a proxy project object and get it back into PHP, the Qcode framework will actually instantiate a real project object with all the functionality for getting and receiving and dealing with relationships and things like that. So if I say project, notice all the methods which come with the code generated version of project. And I'm looking specifically at get person array because I want to get the array of people associated with this project. So get person array, and that's what I want to return. And then of course go ahead and write out the PHP documentation. The return value is just an array of person objects, right? So I'll say person bracket project, and I'll save. Now if I go back to Windows, I will go ahead and add an event handler for the project list dropdown change. And the first thing I want to do is, what project did they select? So project, selected project, equals, well, we're going to look at the list, the project's list box. We're going to look at whatever the selected item is, and then we're going to get the item that was selected. Now, this should work, but because we are dealing with .NET, everything needs to be explicitly typed. We're going to do some fun typecasting here. So again, just please bear with me as I kind of add some parentheses and fun stuff. I think that should do it. Good. Cool. So now I have selected project. Now I want to use that project to get at the list of people. So if I refresh the web reference and I say person, in theory you should now have issue tracker.person, right? So person now shows up as a list of classes I can start using and instantiating. Array of persons is the opt service get team members. And note that get team members is now a function that shows up in this list as well. Get team members takes in a project, and we know what project they selected because we just figured that out on the line above. So I'll say I've selected project. So now this will call out to the web service, get the list of people objects, and I can now do, similar to above, do a for each on the person in person array, list team members, items, add, new list item. And for the name, I'll show like the first name space last name. So I'll say opt person. And notice that first name, last name, ID are all show up as valid properties in the person proxy object here. So first name space opt person last name. And then for the object that we want to pass into the person object itself, so just say that here. And I think parentheses, save. Go ahead and rerun this. Load, and if I chose something like the internal audit project, you'll now see a bunch of people showing up in the list. This isn't in alphabetical order, so let's go ahead and sort it. Now, I think it's actually probably the best idea for running something like this that the web service itself sends back a list of sorted people. So we'll go back to the application, the web service, and you'll note that for the object relational modeling it's generated, it takes in a bunch of optional clauses, and QCoda uses something called QCoda query to be able to generate an object-oriented version of your SQL statements. There's a lot more documentation on this online. Go ahead and read through it if you're curious about it. But I'll just go ahead and specify that I want to order by, in the person table, first last name, and then secondarily by first name. Parentheses don't match. If they do, I save. If I go back to my form, notice that I didn't actually change the function prototype, so I actually don't need to regenerate the wizard file, so I don't need to update anything. I can just rerun the application. Control 5, hit load, choose T-Core System CRM project, and now you can see everything is nicely now put in order. And also they show that the fields match. In T-Core Systems, the last four are Sam Field Schmidt, Brady Smith, Winnie Smith. If I go to the T-Core Systems project here, you'll notice that it matches here. Brady Smith, Winnie Smith. Oh, oops. Yeah, sorry. Brady Smith, Winnie Smith, Marty, and Nancy Stevenson. So we are pulling the valid data from the project. Cool. The final thing in this application we want to do is we select a team member. Go ahead and fill out the text box and then allow the user to actually update the information. So let's go ahead and close this. If we go ahead and select a team member, similar to above, we want to figure out what the selected person is. So we'll say person, list item, list team members, selected item, item. Given that selected person, let's go ahead and fill out the label, the text, the two text boxes with the actual person's first name and last name. So we'll say label ID text equals object person or object selected person ID. And we need to actually convert it to a string because obviously it's an integer value, not a string value. Next thing, we'll say the first name text box's value is the selected person's first name, and then the last name is the exact same treatment. Save it, run it, we'll go ahead and load, go ahead and choose Active Marketing Campaign, and if we choose Joe Godwin, you see that it's showing up there. If we specify essential, it's pretty much standard Ruby programming. But now we actually want to say, for the updates, we actually want it to go back to the database and update the record. So we'll go ahead and go back to our web service. Public function update person. Similar to how we can take in an object, the proxy object, and change it around the project, we can do the same thing for person. And like any good ORM-based framework, when you have a full person object, one of the things that we generate for you ahead of time is the save method. And as you can see, we can just go ahead and say, okay, we'll take in the person object and we'll hit save. Before I go on, please note that this simplicity is for the purposes of this demo. If you're building a real application, especially something that's out on the internet, I strongly encourage you to add some sort of, authentication around this so that people aren't just willy-nilly, updating your entire database. So I'll go ahead and at the PHP documentation so that it knows that the input parameter is in fact a person object. I will save, go back to Visual Studio and say update web reference. And then when I click on the update button, what I want it to do is, again, figure out who the selected person is from this context. For that selected person, let's go ahead and say the first name equals the first name of the text box. Let's just trim it just for fun too. Select the person, last name, last name, text, trim. And then we'll go ahead and use a service to save the, or to update the person. So we'll say service, update person, and we'll pass in the person that we are updating. And finally, we'll just do a little bit of an alert to show that the person is updated. So let me save that, run it. Let me first go to this refresh, so we have a fresh database. So let's pretend that Michael Bridges, he actually prefers his name to be called Mike. So we'll go ahead and say load the projects, and I think we were on Acme Financial's backend project. We'll look for Michael Bridges, so here's Michael Bridges. We'll change his name to Mike. Hit update. Get the person updated. Now if we go back and just hit refresh, you hopefully see that Michael is updated. So hopefully you can see it was pretty straightforward to build out an entire ad. You'll note that actually, I mean, this is kind of a cheesy, I mean, it's a canned demo, obviously, but it is pretty, it's a pretty, substantial application in terms of being able to do some kind of GUI-based administration for an existing web application. And actually, if you look at the web service code, it really didn't take a lot of code at all to build out some of the functionality. I mean, a lot of functionality that we're using is already built in because, again, we have an existing application, and that's what I'm trying to talk about, right? But just creating a couple of really simple wrappers allows you to expose that existing functionality as a web service. And to really drive the point home, I'm going to go ahead and refresh this WSDL file, and as you can see, and I'll zoom in again, it's gotten pretty lengthy. And again, no one in their right mind is ever going to want to code this. But using something like a framework, something like Qt, it'll go ahead and generate that stuff for you. So that just makes your life a heck of a lot easier. So kind of in conclusion, we did talk about frameworks. Some of you guys said that you're using frameworks, some of you guys said you didn't. I would really want to drive the point home to really consider using them. It doesn't have to be Qt, obviously I am biased, but there's a lot of really good frameworks out there, especially in the PHP space, where you have things like Zen, Cake, Symfony, Qt, Prado. The list goes on and on and on. It's one of the advantages of PHP over some of the other languages out there is that you have choices. With choices, it allows you to find a framework that will best suit your team or whatnot. Yeah?
So the Qt framework doesn't require this anything?
Qt framework does not require this. So all in all, it's a win-win-win because you have more choices, and probably one draw, just because, yeah, you do have to take some time to really evaluate some of the frameworks to find out what best suits your needs, but at least you have the option. Was there a question?
Just a comment. When we, I don't know if Qt does it, but we discovered that with the WSDL files that with Apache they actually were being cached, and if you didn't turn the PHP caching off,
yes,
you wanted to kill someone.
Yes, yeah, and actually the documentation does talk about that specifically. There's a full example site that talks about the SOAP stuff, and very clearly in one line and a lot of comments I say, make sure to turn it off. Thank you. It's a really good point that especially if you're doing development of web services in PHP, be sure to turn off the SOAP WSDL caching. Otherwise, you're going to be in a world of hurt. You're not going to know what happened. The caching mechanism that's built in to PHP is really good in production for obvious reasons because it doesn't have to regenerate all that stuff every single time. To add a separate note, actually Qt has its own level of caching just because that stuff gets really confusing. So it is actually possible to leave it off all the time and take advantage of Qt's caching mechanism to be able to do that caching for you. But thank you for that. That's good. Okay, thank you. Qt right now does not support REST. We will be doing it. We wanted to tackle SOAP first. SOAP is considerably in orders of magnitude more complex. And so we really wanted to come up with a set way of doing web services that deals with kind of the most complex model. Now that this is solidified and in place, getting this and dumbing this down to REST is obviously going to be very, very straightforward. So SOAP, it can be easy. Web services in general can be easy as well, so definitely check it out. Again, I'm going to hammer the point home. Check out frameworks Doesn't matter which one it is, just you're going to save a lot of time, and to get the consistency across your entire application, across your entire enterprise using frameworks is just going to be a huge win for your entire organization. Qcode itself has over 5 years of implementations on everything from your Fortune 500 companies to your large government agencies and everything in between. Feel free to check out qcode.com if you want to find out more. It's open source with the MIT license, which is one of the most loosest licenses, which basically allows you to do pretty much anything you want with the code base without any sort of retribution or being sued or anything like that. And my contact information is there. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact me. Are there any questions here?
What's the size of the framework?
Good question. The size of the framework right now, zipped, is around 2 megabytes. The reason why it's so big, because a lot of the frameworks are actually a lot smaller, is because it has a lot of examples. Some of those examples actually involve images, and so the images for the examples actually ends up taking up the most stuff. If you take out the examples, which is really good for a tutorial, that's why it comes with it, but in production you never actually run it. I think it comes in under 500K. Any other questions? Okay, well thank you very much. I'll be around.